Strap in and grab your popcorn, folks. America's political circus is back in town and the clowns are running the show. While San Francisco's leaders pledge to play hide-and-seek ICE edition, Trump's out here exposing Biden for wanting to send $50 million worth of condoms to Hamas. I guess even terrorists deserve safe operations. Meanwhile, Democrats are clutching their pearls over federal workers actually showing up to work. The horror! Nothing says productive governance like panicking when your Zoom privileges get revoked. But let's talk about the real meltdown here. The View ladies hyperventilating because Trump's team dared to invite podcasters to the press room. Whoopi's so triggered, she's rewriting history. Apparently, wokeness built the White House, not enslaved laborers. I thought that she would have gone the other way around, to be honest with you. And don't get me started on Senator Warren, the Pharma cash queen, screeching at RFK Jr. about enrichment while her campaign coffers jingle with Pharma dough. Bernie's over here yelling about onesies like a grandpa who lost his Metamucil. Folks, the left's not just losing the plot, they're burning the script and blaming the ISBN number. So stay tuned, it only gets weirder, and there's no greater example of how just weird it can get than San Francisco, where city leaders said this in response to the nationwide deportations.
We know that San Francisco is a sanctuary city. We will always be a sanctuary city.
We want to be clear. The sheriff's office does not and will not take part in immigration raids or any federal law enforcement actions directed towards the immigrant community.
Very simple message. If you want a safe city, you must support a sanctuary city. Sanctuary city, the whole point, the whole purpose is to make sure that people feel safe testifying to crimes and reporting crimes. So a safe city is a sanctuary city. And I want to end by saying that immigrants built our nation, immigrants make our country better, and in San Francisco, we support and celebrate our immigrant community. Thank you.
Are we here to stand with immigrants? Yeah. Are we here to stand with our families? Yeah. Are we here to stand with our workers? Yeah. Donald Trump, this is what community looks like.
San Francisco leaders aren't just virtue signaling their way into becoming a third world country, they're sprinting toward collapse like it's a DEI-sponsored Hunger Games. And when the city's finally in ruins, they'll pat themselves on the back for how equitable the suffering is. Now let's start with the obvious rhetorical sleight of hand here. The city leader announced in a shrill manner, San Francisco is a sanctuary city. We will always be a sanctuary city. That sounds less like a proud declaration and more like a hostage video. Blink twice if you need ICE to rescue you. The whole very simple message they're pushing? Yeah, it's simple, all right. As simple as the guy in San Francisco taking a dump in the middle of a Walgreens aisle. Now, let's talk about the classic appeal to emotion. Another city leader said, if you want a safe city, you must support a sanctuary city. That's an entirely unfounded premise. That's like saying, if you want a fireproof house, you must support arsonists. The whole sanctuary cities make us safer argument has been parroted endlessly, but reality tells a different story. San Francisco, the shining beacon of lawless utopia, saw a 567% increase in motor vehicle thefts from 2010 to 2023, according to the San Francisco Police Department. And by motor vehicle theft, I mean you have better odds keeping your car in a demolition derby than parked on a San Francisco street. Meanwhile, violent crimes have stayed well above the national average. You know, it's bad when even the city's pigeons are walking around with switchblades. And let's not forget the case of Kate Steinle, a 32-year-old woman who was randomly shot and killed in 2015 by an illegal alien who had been deported 5 times and had 7 felony convictions. But because San Francisco thinks ICE is the real villain of the story here, the city ignored an ICE detainer and let him walk free, right into another crime scene. This isn't compassion. It's government-endorsed Darwinism. Now, the entire argument that these city leaders lay out is a textbook false equivalence. They conflate all immigrants, legal and illegal, because that's the only way their argument holds any emotional weight. Immigrants built our nation. Yeah, and legal immigrants continue to do so, but that's not the issue here, is it? Let's get to the numbers. Each year, over 1 million people legally immigrate to the U.S., going through extensive vetting, background checks, and legal processes. Meanwhile, during Biden's presidency, an estimated 7 to 10 million illegal crossings were recorded at the southern border, an all-time high. That's more people sneaking in than the entire population of Massachusetts. But don't worry, the Biden administration has a solid plan, released 1.7 million of them into the U.S., and scheduled court dates for 2032, because surely they will show up. They always do. And the best part, the people who actually follow the law, the ones who wait years, fill out endless paperwork, and pay fees, are basically treated like chumps. The government's official message to legal immigrants is, you should have just hopped over the fence, you dumb. And then we get the rallying cries, the empty slogans, here to stand with immigrants, yeah, here to stand with families, yeah, here to stand with the workers, yeah. Meanwhile, the only thing the city is actually standing with is a growing pile of used needles on Market Street. Now here's the bill for this utopia. Illegal immigration costs U.S. taxpayers approximately $151 billion annually. That includes healthcare, education, welfare, and law enforcement costs, aka your tax dollars funding people who aren't even supposed to be here. In California alone, illegal immigration costs over $30 billion per year, which is more than the state's entire budget for higher education. But don't worry, San Francisco is doing its part. The city spends an estimated $180 million annually on services for illegal immigrants, because nothing says equity like cutting services for tax-paying citizens so someone who crossed the border last week can get free health care. Oh, and what about jobs? Illegal immigration suppresses wages, especially for low-income workers. The National Bureau of Economic Research found that illegal immigration reduces the wages of native-born low-skilled workers by as much as 10%. But sure, let's keep calling it a workers' movement while making sure legal workers get replaced by people who don't have to follow labor laws. And then we get the big finale. Donald Trump, this is what a community looks like. Ah, yes, because when all else fails, just scream, orange man bad, and call it a day. What does Trump have to do with San Francisco's crime rates? Well, nothing. But these people need their boogeyman. Otherwise, they might actually have to govern. You know, do their job. So let's be very clear. This isn't about community. It's about ideology. It's about defying federal law for political theater, even when it means harboring criminals, compromising public safety, and treating actual American citizens like second-class suckers. But hey, as long as it gets a round of applause at a press conference, who cares how many people get robbed, assaulted, or killed? At the end of the day, San Francisco isn't just a sanctuary city. It's a state-sponsored clown show. But unfortunately, you're the one paying the bill. Now, speaking of sanctuary cities, Trump had this to say about all the Latin American leaders who are refusing to take back all of their criminals.
I appreciated they took back that tough talk, but, you know, we may have tough talk from others, but it's not going to mean anything. They're going to all take them back, and they're going to like it, too. They're going to like it. They're going to take it back, and they're going to like it.
Trump's out here treating foreign leaders like kids refusing to eat their vegetables. You're going to take them back, and you're going to like it. Next thing you know, he's going to start grounding countries and taking away their foreign aid and Xbox privileges. Anyway, he later made a surprising revelation about something he found in the budget that was supposed to go to Hamas.
Process, we identified and stopped $50 million being sent to Gaza to buy condoms for Hamas. 50 million. And you know what's happened to them? They've used them as a method of making bombs. How about that?
You gotta love how Trump just casually dropped that the U.S. almost funded Hamas's explosively bad ideas, like it's a rejected Shark Tank pitch. Condoms, but for bombs. Honestly, if this were true, it'd be the most creative misuse of foreign aid since gender studies in Pakistan. Either way, glad someone hit the brakes before our tax dollars went boom. Anyway, shortly after that, Trump issued an ultimatum to federal employees.
As everyone knows, most of the time they're not working, they're not very productive, and it's unfair to the millions of people in the United States who are in fact working hard from job sites and not from their home. As federal employees, they must meet a high standard. They're representing our government, they're representing our country. If they don't agree by February 6th to show up back to work in their office, they will be terminated, and we will therefore be downscaling our government, which is something that the last 10 presidents have tried very hard to do but failed. Because as
Trump just turned remote work into no work. Imagine the sheer panic in DC right now. Thousands of bureaucrats scrambling to remember where their office is, dusting off their government-issued chairs for the first time in 4 years. The real tragedy, some of them might actually have to start doing their jobs that we pay for. Oh, the horror. Also, gotta love how Trump managed to sneak in a government downsize as a feature, not a bug. 10 presidents talked about it, but Trump's like, watch me fire half the swamp with an Outlook calendar invite. Anyway, shifting gears to a group that's also on the verge of losing their jobs, the ladies on The View are all bleeding from their eyes and ears because it's that time of the week again where their TDS gets in sync.
We're also opening up this briefing room to new media voices who produce news-related content and whose outlet is not already represented by one of the seats in this room. We welcome independent journalists, podcasters, social media influencers, and content creators to apply for credentials to cover this White House. This seat in the front of the room, which is usually occupied by the press secretary's staff, will be called the new media seat.
All right.
What'd she say?
She basically said that they were going to give
Oh,
unqualified
God, how boring.
unqualified
Can they get
people
somebody there who's
jobs.
not so
Behind the
tedious?
Table podcast needs to apply for White House credentials.
Oh, they'd love having Joy in that room.
Joy
So
can
I
go.
got a question. So wait a second. So in other words, instead of Bob Woodward, they want Kim Kardashian? What? I don't get it.
Joy Behar melting down because podcasters might get press credentials is the most mainstream media thing ever. Gatekeeping journalism like it's an exclusive country club while pretending they're the guardians of truth. Bob Woodward, please. Half the White House press corps is just glorified stenographers for the administration anyway. The only difference is now independent voices might get a chance to ask real questions instead of pre-approved talking points. But sure, keep pretending CNN and the New York Times are the last bastions of integrity while ignoring the fact that TikTokers with a ring light are out scooping them on major stories. Also, Kim Kardashian? That's rich coming from a show where Meghan McCain was considered a political expert. Anyway, can't wait to hear what Whoopi has to say about this. I bet it's good.
I would like this young lady this is her first job, I would like her to do a little homework. Because she said something yesterday that really pissed me off. And that was, she said, there will be no wokeness here.
Oh, yeah.
Let me explain something to you. Because without that wokeness, you might not have that job.
Yeah.
Because women were not invited to that table. Women were not invited to many tables in this nation. The reason we fought and busted our behinds to make sure that you didn't have to worry about this. And now to hear you talk about it and to hear anybody talk about the wokeness was put in place for a reason. Because black people couldn't get into colleges. Because women could not get into the colleges they wanted to go to. This is all women.
Yeah.
See, this is not black, Asian, this is all women. Women were not invited to this party. It was a man's world, and we busted our asses to make sure that this was a person's world. So please stop using that phrase and talking about, because you don't understand what you're saying. You're saying about yourself that, you know, hey, that's a terrible thing to be. It's not a terrible thing to be. That's why we fought. That's what we were fighting for, so that you could stand in that podium, so that Catherine Jean-Pierre could stand at that podium. So women of all kinds of colors and ilks, wherever they came from, whatever their belief system was, they had the opportunity to bust down that door.
Here we go again. Whoopi Wokeberg having yet another meltdown on The View, this time over Caroline Leavitt daring to say the word woke in a way that wasn't a full-throated endorsement of progressive dogma. And in classy Whoopi fashion, she doesn't just disagree, she launches into a history lecture so historically inaccurate, even a freshman political science major would be embarrassed to turn it in. Now, Whoopi starts off by questioning Leavitt's qualifications. This young woman whose first job this is, I would like her to do her homework. Ah, yes, the classic condescend first, argue later approach. Because, you see, in Whoopi's mind, if you're young and conservative, you must automatically be ignorant. It's funny, though, when it's a 20-something progressive activist, fresh out of college, making grand declarations about how to fix society, Whoopi and the View panel practically bow at their feet. Let's remember Greta Thunberg, at what, 12 years old, these women were gushing over her? But when it's a conservative woman, suddenly experience matters. Then she gets to the real meat of the argument. There will be no wokeness here. Oh no, not that. Not the erasure of the sacred word woke. Quick, someone call the Department of Progressive Feelings. She then claims that without wokeness, Caroline Leavitt wouldn't have a job because, wait for it, women weren't invited to the table. Hold up. Caroline Leavitt is literally standing at the podium as the White House press secretary, a podium previously occupied by multiple women, including the very progressive Karine Jean-Pierre, who was the first black lady, openly lesbian, whatever label she had for herself, press secretary. If Whoopi's argument held any weight, then by her logic, Leavitt shouldn't even exist in that role, but she does. So what exactly is being rolled back here? I'm confused. And let's get real about this whole wokeness is the reason women have jobs argument. That's straight up historical revisionism. Women fought for equal rights long before the term woke was even weaponized into its current form. The women's suffrage movement, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, Title IX, none of these things happened because of some progressive TikToker screeching about microaggressions. They happened through actual legislation and societal shifts driven by bipartisan efforts. Keyword, bipartisan. But here's where Whoopi really goes off the rails. The wokeness was put in place for a reason, because black people couldn't get into colleges, because women could not get into colleges they wanted to go to. This is the rhetorical equivalent of mashing every social justice buzzword into a blender and hoping it comes out as a coherent argument. Well, what we conveniently ignores is that we are not in the 1950s anymore. In fact, women now outnumber men in college enrollment and graduation rates. According to the National Center for Education Statistics, women have consistently earned more college degrees than men for decades. So if Whoopi's claim were true, then today's higher education system would be a wasteland. And as for race, let's talk about affirmative action, because Whoopi's argument rests on the idea that wokeness was some noble force correcting past injustices and must continue indefinitely. But when the Supreme Court struck down race-based admissions, what was actually exposed? That these policies weren't just about opening doors for minorities, they were actively shutting them on others, particularly Asian and white students who outperformed their peers but were purely penalized for their race. If wokeness was truly about fairness, then explain why Harvard's internal data revealed in the affirmative action case showed that Asian students had to score significantly higher than black and Hispanic applicants to have the same chance of admission. Explain why prestigious schools were caught rating Asian applicants lower on personality traits to justify rejecting them. If Whoopi really cared about equality, she'd be furious at a system that says some kids have to work twice as hard for the same opportunity based purely on their skin color. But that's the thing. Wokeness isn't about fairness. It's about control. It's about deciding who gets to succeed, who deserves a seat at the table, and who gets to be the permanent victim. And now that it's crumbling under its own hypocrisy, people like Whoopi don't know what to do besides throw a tantrum and attempt to poorly rewrite history. Then comes my personal favorite part. Women were not invited to this party. It was a man's world. And we busted our asses to make sure that this was. Followed by an applause break. Of course, because nothing gets the View's audience going like a good old-fashioned "we're still oppressed" speech, despite the overwhelming evidence of the contrary. But let's get to what's actually happening here. Whoopi isn't upset because Caroline Levitt said something factually incorrect. She's upset because Levitt, a conservative woman, dared to reject progressivism's control over language. The left treats woke like a sacred term, a shield that makes all their policies untouchable. But the moment someone challenges it, oh no, how dare you disrespect the movement that gave you your success, you miserable women. It's funny, they turn into men. That's crazy. Now here's the truth. Caroline Levitt didn't get to where she is because of wokeness. She got there because she worked for it. Just like millions of other women who have succeeded without needing a diversity quota, an identity boost, or Whoopi Goldberg's historically challenged pep talks. At the end of the day, Whoopi's entire argument boils down to, you should be grateful to wokeness because without it, you'd still be in the kitchen, woman! Which is ironic because what's actually happening is that progressives are now trying to put asterisks next to every woman's success, telling them their accomplishments don't belong to them, but to the movement. Caroline Levitt never said women shouldn't have rights. She didn't say black people shouldn't go to college. She simply rejected the left's monopoly on language and refused to play by their rules. And that's what really sent Whoopi spiraling. Anyway, seconds later, Joy Behar joined the fray, and let's just say that the conversation somehow dropped another 35 IQ points. It's in the retard range now.
She's probably been put in there because, according to Donald Trump, she's a 10. You know that's what it is.
I want to be clear, though. It's not her first job. It was her first press briefing. She worked in the previous Trump administration.
What I'm saying, this is the first time that she's been she may be. But my point is that job would not maybe have been open to her.
No, I understand. I just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah. Yes, The View, where intellectual rigor goes to die. So let me get this straight. Joy Behar, the same woman who screeches about sexism every 5 minutes, just reduced Caroline Levitt's entire career to Trump thinks she's a 10. That's rich. Nothing screams feminism quite like implying a successful woman only got a job because of her looks. Peak progressive logic. Every woman deserves a seat at the table, unless she's a conservative. Then she's just a pretty face. And then we got Whoopi's backpedaling attempt. That job may not have been open to her before. Translation, wokeness made this possible, so she should be grateful and never criticize it. But here's a fun fact. Carolyn Levitt earned that position. She worked in the previous Trump administration, climbed the ranks, and now holds one of the most high-profile press jobs in the country. And she did it without playing the identity politics game, which is exactly why they can't stand her. It's hilarious. If Carolyn were a Democrat, they'd be calling her an inspiration, a trailblazer, a sign of success. But because she's a Republican, suddenly she's just a blonde who got lucky. And that tells you everything you need to know about how The View operates.
Well, and that it's fact-driven how they cover it.
The problem that I have with it, though, is, she's saying that these people that are going to apply will meet their criteria. We understand that their criteria is woefully deficient and unserious. Right. I think that their real problem in this election, one of the real problems among the many, is the misinformation and disinformation that was disseminated on social media by these influencers and by these podcasters. Why are they qualified to sit in front in the White House briefing room and tell America what is going on with the country? Traditionally, to become a White House correspondent or to be in that briefing room, you had to have a journalism degree. Yeah. You had to have qualifications. Yeah. So I guess the rise of mediocrity is here to stay.
They're making a Snapchat equivalent to the New York Times.
But Sunny Hostin is absolutely trembling at the thought of podcasters asking questions in the White House press room. You can just feel the panic. Why are they qualified to sit in front of a podium and tell America what's going on? I don't know, Sunny. Maybe because the mainstream media has spent the last decade torching its own credibility. Maybe because people are sick of being gaslit by corporate newsrooms that play defense for the government instead of holding it accountable. And the whole you need a journalism degree argument, give me a break. You know who doesn't have a journalism degree? Anderson Cooper, Tucker Carlson, Rachel Maddow. But yeah, let's pretend a piece of paper from NYU is a holy grail of truth-telling. Meanwhile, the credentialed press spent years pushing the Russia hoax, COVID misinformation, the Hunter Biden laptop disinfo lie, and whatever else they were spoon-fed by the government insiders. The real meltdown here isn't about qualifications, it's about control. These legacy media gatekeepers cannot handle the fact that independent voices are now more trusted than they are. They've lost their monopoly, and instead of reflecting on why Americans no longer trust them, they just whine about misinformation and call everyone else unserious. Oh, and Joy Behar piping in with making a Snapchat equivalent to the New York Times. Hilarious. First off, the New York Times has been caught fabricating stories more times than I can count. Take Jason Blair, for example, one of their own reporters who in 2003 was exposed for fabricating quotes, plagiarizing content, and outright inventing events across dozens of articles. The guy was writing stories about places he had never even visited, and somehow the Times let it slide until they couldn't cover it up anymore. Then there's Walter Duranty, the Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist who denied and covered up the Soviet-engineered Holodomor famine in Ukraine while parroting Stalin's propaganda. Millions starved, and yet the Times stood by their man. And to this day, they have never officially returned his Pulitzer. And let's not forget their role in pushing the false narrative about weapons of mass destruction, WMDs, in Iraq in the early 2000s. Relying on unreliable sources like Ahmed Chalabi, the Times was instrumental in spreading disinformation that helped justify a war that cost thousands of American lives. Fast forward to 2018, and the paper hired Sarah Jong, despite her long history of racist tweets against white people, proving once again that their so-called journalistic standards conveniently shift depending on the offender's politics and racial makeup. So excuse me if I don't buy The View's crocodile tears over new media voices being allowed into the White House press room. The idea that podcasters and independent journalists can't be trusted while legacy media outlets like The Times, with their long history of fabrication, bias, and outright deception, are somehow the gold standard is laughable. At this point, some random guy on Snapchat has a better track record than CNN or the New York Times. Even The View, the self-appointed gatekeepers of truth, has been caught peddling misinformation this year, to the point where their own producers had to step in and force on-air corrections. A particularly embarrassing instance occurred when the hosts, including Sunny Hostin, yes, the one who seems the most outraged by the whole situation, made false and unverified claims about various political figures, only to be interrupted mid-show by producers demanding a correction. In one case, Hostin begrudgingly read a legal note clarifying that Matt Gaetz and Pete Hegseth had denied certain allegations and had not been charged with any crimes, a correction she delivered with the enthusiasm of someone being forced to eat glass. It's a pattern with The View. Recklessly push a narrative, get called out, then mumble a correction with a scowl when producers force their hand. Yet they sit on their high horse, acting as if they are the arbiters of truth while attacking independent journalists and podcasters as unserious. Maybe if The View stopped needing so many live fact checks, they wouldn't be so terrified of the competition. Now, obviously, this isn't about protecting journalism. It's about desperately clinging to relevance while the public continues to tune out. And that's why they're absolutely losing their minds.
I will say this. I feel a lot better when I know there are standards people have to meet.
Yeah, of course.
And so
qualifications
you can bring in whoever you want. The proof will be in the pudding. Mm-hmm. We can stand and say this is terrible, but so we're gonna wait and see what happens. And the minute it turns out to be state-run television, or state-run information, or state-run news, because I disagree that people got stuff wrong. I don't know what people were looking for, because the people I talked to were not looking for the things that these folks were looking for. And now that they've got him, are they getting what they want? So that's just my opinion.
But even on the media front, we haven't gotten to this real quickly this week. The CIA came out and said that COVID very likely came from a lab leak. And the New York Times shut down coverage of that. They wouldn't publish an op-ed by a senator from Arkansas, Tom Cotton, saying that this was a credential theory. At the time I was at DOD and that was openly discussed, is a very real possibility.
Confidence by the CIA.
There is a fact that the media at times has gotten things wrong.
Listen, it isn't about whether they get it wrong or right. It's what they do to correct it. That's the problem.
That does matter. Yeah.
Well, that's what I'm saying. That's what I want.
But it also matters that the CIA said that it was a low confidence report, and that is why the New York Times, which has standards, didn't report on it.
But withholding the information altogether purely and saying that it's not even a considered theory was what the mistake was.
This is priceless. The View's brain trust is now pretending they care about standards and journalistic integrity. You've got Whoopi rambling about how it's not about whether the media gets it wrong, it's about how they correct it. As if The View hasn't needed multiple live corrections because their host can't stop spouting misinformation. And then we get Sunny Hostin in all her smug glory, insisting that the New York Times didn't report on the COVID lab leak theory because the CIA's report had low confidence. Oh, now they care about confidence levels? Where was this cautious skepticism when they were pushing the Steele dossier, the Fine People hoax, or the Hunter Biden laptop disinfo narrative? Suddenly, when a story challenges their preferred narrative, it's all about journalistic standards. And let's talk about this absolute gaslighting from Whoopi. We can wait to see what happens, and the minute it turns out to be state-run television, we'll call it out. Excuse me? What do you think mainstream media has been for the last decade? Every major outlet carried water for government agencies that lied about COVID origins, suppressed dissenting voices, and ran cover for Biden's disastrous policies. The media has already functioned as state-run TV, just with a progressive slant. And let's not forget that for years, the media, The View included, ran interference for Joe Biden's obvious cognitive decline, gaslighting the public into believing that his incoherent ramblings, vacant stares, and frequent confusion were just gaffes or right-wing conspiracy theories. Any suggestion that Biden wasn't mentally fit was met with smug dismissals, cheap fakes, fact checks, and the ever-reliable Republicans pounce narrative. Then came the debate. A train wreck so undeniable that even his most loyal media allies were forced to acknowledge reality. Suddenly, the floodgates were opened. Outlets that had spent years covering for him flipped overnight, publishing think pieces about concerns that had somehow materialized just then, as if Biden hadn't been malfunctioning in public for years. But as soon as Kamala got the nomination, the narrative shifted right back into protection mode. Biden was once again a strong, capable leader, and any questions about his cognitive state were suddenly framed as attacks on his legacy. The media's shameless about-face wasn't journalism, it was damage control. They didn't suddenly realize Biden was declining. happening. They just ran out of ways to hide it. And once they got what they wanted, they went right back to gaslighting the public, proving once again that their loyalty is to the agenda and not the truth. But the best part is when Alyssa drops a nuclear fact bomb right in the middle of their delusion. She straight up exposes how the New York Times refused to publish an op-ed by a sitting Senator Tom Cotton because he dared to suggest the lab leak was a credentialed theory. That's not just getting it wrong. That's actively silencing opposing views to protect the establishment narrative. At the end of the day, these women don't care about journalistic integrity. They care about controlling who gets to speak. And the second independent journalists, podcasters, and social media voices start taking up space in the conversation, the view melts down because they know people are tuning out of their corporate media echo chamber and finding truth elsewhere.
I wonder if you really want to, make an impact, why aren't they sending folks back who are in jail already? Why aren't we seeing those mass deportations of people who have been found guilty of a crime? And why aren't we sending them back
He'd have to send the January 6 people back too then, because... Why is Dr. Phil there? What is
because
Dr.
it is
Phil
now a
doing
reality show. This is the new reality show. And I'm hoping that we can put music behind this because it's only going to be a matter of weeks before we start to see, just folks showing up. What is going on?
And just when you thought The View couldn't reach greater levels of unhinged, they surprise you. Whoopi's out here pretending to be confused about why mass deportations wouldn't just focus on criminals when the entire premise of illegal immigration is that they're in the country illegally. That's the crime. That's the problem. If you sneak into a country without permission, you don't get a golden ticket just because you haven't committed another felony yet. Then we get Joy Behar, the human embodiment of a bad Twitter reply, trying to compare actual illegal immigrants to American citizens who participated in January 6th, as if there's even a remotely logical connection there. Where exactly would you deport them to, Joy? Florida? The sheer desperation to deflect is hilarious. Illegal immigration is the problem, so naturally they start yelling about Trump and January 6th because they have zero actual argument and a bad case of Trump derangement syndrome. And then Whoopi again, whining about Dr. Phil being there at the deportations with Tom Homan, as if she's shocked that someone outside her media bubble is allowed to have a voice. This is the new reality show. Whoopi, you're on The View. Your entire job is daytime television theater, but now that the discussion isn't going your way, it's suddenly a reality show? Bottom line, these women have no argument, no real counterpoints, no rebuttals, and nothing but sarcasm and deflection to offer. When they can't win the debate, they just mock the premise and hope no one notices they have nothing to say, which is about 99% of the time.
100 deportations a day, but half of them have no criminal record.
Yes.
And wait a second, and the price of eggs is up, I'm just saying.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I guess Joy Behar woke up that day and decided to unlock a new level of stupidity. Wow. Because she says 1,200 deportations a day, but half have no criminal record. Yeah, Joy, because being in the country illegally is already a crime. You don't need to rob a liquor store on top of sneaking across the border for deportation to make sense. That's like saying half of these burglars didn't even commit murder. Why are we even arresting them? But then comes the real chef's kiss moment, and the price of eggs is up. I'm just saying, what? Did she just try to connect mass deportations to egg prices? What's next? Blaming border security for climate change? Inflation isn't skyrocketing because illegal immigrants are being deported. It's skyrocketing because of insane government spending, supply chain mismanagement, and disastrous economic policies by the Biden administration. But sure, let's pretend it's because ICE had the audacity to enforce immigration law. It's interesting how Democrats suddenly care about egg prices again. Not because they actually want to fix the economy, but because they saw it work as a campaign message for Trump. For 3 years, when inflation was obliterating the wallets of every American under Biden, they either downplayed it, blamed corporate greed, or told people to just stop being poor. Now, a little over a week into Trump's presidency, they're acting like he personally went to every grocery store and slapped a $6 price tag on a dozen eggs. It's transparently lazy, blaming Trump for problems Biden created while hoping people forget who was in charge when inflation spiraled out of control. If they actually cared, they'd be talking about Trump's economic policies, supply chain fixes, or deregulation efforts. But no, the best they can do is parrot the one talking point they know worked for Trump and hope no one notices the irony. And of course, the audience claps like trained seals because the viewers don't require logic. Just a snarky comment with, "I'm just saying," at the end. Joy, you're just saying nonsense, and we all know it.
Can I say something? Because, you know, we keep on talking about criminals and immigrants being criminals. And I just want people to understand what the facts are and the stats are, is that undocumented immigrants are much less likely to have committed crimes than American citizens. American citizens commit more crimes than anyone who is undocumented. I also want to make the point that an undocumented immigrant is not a criminal because he or she is undocumented. That is a civil offense. So to call people illegals is, in and of itself, I think, xenophobic and racist.
And incorrect.
I do. And incorrect. The other thing that I will say is that, to Joy's point, on Sunday, there were 1,179 people arrested. Only 613 of them were considered criminal arrests. That means that the rest appear to be either nonviolent offenders or have not committed any criminal offense at all. And so what we are doing, again, is we have decided as a country to demonize a certain type of immigrant, a certain looking type of immigrant. And those immigrants are either from Central America or Mexico. They are brown. There are a lot of undocumented immigrants here, about 40% of them who come from other countries that aren't brown. But we are not rounding them up. So we are not doing that. So what we are doing, though, is making sure that these other people. My final point is, to your first question, Whoopi, I think this country is a country that lacks empathy unless you have lived it, unless you have a lived experience. And that is very unfortunate. There are people that live life of privilege who don't walk in those steps.
Sunny is really going for gold in mental gymnastics today. She starts with a classic deflection tactic. Undocumented immigrants are much less likely to have committed crimes than American citizens. This is one of the laziest talking points in the book because it intentionally conflates different populations and ignores the obvious statistical flaws. First off, every illegal immigrant is already committing a crime by entering or remaining in the U.S. illegally. But let's pretend for a second that's not relevant. The data she's likely referencing comes from studies that compare crime rates between illegal immigrants and the entire U.S. citizen population, which includes every single American, from law-abiding retirees to career criminals. Here's the problem. If you compare any hand-picked subset of the population to the general population, including felons, gang members, and people serving life sentences, you can manipulate the numbers to make it look like that subset is less criminal. But that's not how statistics work. A proper comparison would examine demographically similar groups. But of course it can't do that because that would shatter this fragile narrative. Furthermore, Sunny conveniently ignores the sheer volume of crimes committed by illegal immigrants that wouldn't happen if they weren't here in the first place. Every homicide, assault, and violent offense committed by an illegal immigrant is a crime that was 100% preventable because that individual should never have been in the country to begin with. Then she hits us with, an undocumented immigrant is not a criminal because he or she is undocumented. That is a civil offense. Oh, really? Try overstaying your visa in literally any other country and see how civil that offense feels when you're sitting in a detention center awaiting deportation. Illegal entry is, in fact, a criminal offense under U.S. federal law, 8 U.S. Code 1325. Re-entry after deportation, that's a felony under 8 U.S. Code 1326. But hey, why let the law get in the way of a good sob story? And then, of course, the inevitable pivot to race. What we are doing here is we have decided as a country to demonize a certain type of immigrant. They are brown. And there it is. When all else fails, play the race card and hope no one notices how weak your argument is. This isn't about race, it's about legal status, but Sunny knows that screaming racism shuts down the debate, so she tosses it in like a lazy seasoning over an undercooked meal. But let's actually look at the facts. 40% of illegal immigrants in the US are visa overstays, which include people from Europe, Canada, and other non-brown countries. And guess what? They get deported too. The difference, they're not overwhelmingly pouring over the southern border by the millions every year, creating an unmanageable crisis. If this were about race, then why did Trump's administration implement travel bans on predominantly white European countries during COVID? Why did Biden's administration keep Title 42 in place to deport Haitian immigrants at the border? Could it be that immigration policy isn't actually based on race, but on legal status and national security concern? Shocking, I know. Then we get Sunny's final Oscar-worthy performance. This country lacks empathy unless you have lived it. No, Sunny, this country lacks patience for people who break its laws, demand taxpayer-funded benefits, and then cry oppression when anyone suggests enforcing immigration policy. Americans are some of the most generous people in the world. We take in over 1 million legal immigrants every single year. What we lack empathy for is being gaslit into accepting an unmanageable crisis while being called racist for expecting basic border security. And then for no reason at all, she shoehorns in a completely unrelated Liz Cheney rant, because why not throw a Republican under the bus for absolutely no reason? Sunny's entire argument is a blend of misdirection, cherry-picked statistics, false legal claims, and she claims also to be a lawyer, I guess, I don't know, maybe, and race baiting. It's designed to emotionally manipulate rather than inform. The truth is simple. Illegal immigration is illegal. Crime committed by illegal immigrants is 100% preventable. Enforcing immigration law is not racist. And Americans are tired of being told they have to accept an invasion of millions of people under threat of being labeled xenophobic. The View's audience might clap like trained seals at this nonsense, but no amount of applause can change reality. Anyway, shifting gears to RFK Jr.'s confirmation hearing in the Senate for his Health and Human Services cabinet position, things got interesting, to say the least. Let's start off with Senator Elizabeth Warren, Pocahontas herself.
You financially down the line.
I'll comply with all the ethical guidelines.
That's not the question. You and I, you have said
You're asking me, Senator, sue vaccine pharmaceutical companies. Yeah, you are. That's exactly what you're doing.
Look, no one should be fooled here. As Secretary of HHS, Robert Kennedy will have the power to undercut vaccines and vaccine manufacturing across our country. And for all of his talk about follow the science and his promise that he won't interfere with those of us who want to vaccinate his kids, the bottom line is the same. Kennedy can kill off access to vaccines and make millions of dollars while he does it. Kids might die, but Robert Kennedy can keep cashing in.
Senator, I support vaccines. I support the childhood schedule.
This is peak Pocahontas, screaming about corporate greed while stuffing nearly $1 million in Pharma cash into her campaign war chest. The irony here is almost too much to handle. Let's start with her absolute meltdown when RFK Jr. correctly calls out what she's doing. No, I am not. Why are you yelling? Nothing says I have a totally logical and well-reasoned argument like panicked shouting and a death grip on the microphone. She's furious because RFK Jr. called out the obvious. Big Pharma has spent decades shielding itself from liability, and Warren is trying to make sure that protection stays in place. Then she pulls a classic, won't someone think of the children, fear-mongering. Kennedy can kill off access to vaccines and make millions of dollars while he does it. Kids might die, but Robert Kennedy can keep cashing in. Oh, so now Warren cares about people cashing in on public health policy. That's rich, coming from someone who's taken nearly $900,000 in campaign donations from the health industry per Open Secrets. Great. Don't we love some hypocrisy? And let's not ignore the hilarious projection happening here. Warren is accusing RFK Jr. of profiting off controversy while she spent her entire career grandstanding about corporate corruption while raking in money from the same industries she pretends to fight. She's the political equivalent of an arsonist yelling at the fire department for using too much water. Meanwhile, RFK Jr. just calmly obliterates her narrative. Senator, I support vaccines. I support the childhood schedule. That's the real kicker. Warren isn't even debating RFK Jr. on policy. She's debating the version of him that exists in her head. She needs him to be an anti-vax boogeyman so she can ride in on her white horse. But when he directly states that he supports vaccines, she just barrels forward like a malfunctioning AI bot. The bottom line, Warren isn't upset about RFK Jr. hurting public health. She's terrified that someone might finally hold her corporate donors accountable, and that's why she's yelling. And now for my favorite part of this hearing, when Bernie Sanders went full old man yells at cloud.
You have started a group called the Children's Health Defense. You're the originator. Right now, as I understand it, on their website, they are selling what's called onesies. These are little things, clothing for babies. One of them is titled Unfaxed, Unafraid. Next one, and they're sold for $26 a piece, by the way. Next one is No Vax, No Problem. Now, you're coming before this committee and you say you're pro-vaccine. Just want to ask some questions. And yet your organization is making money selling a child's product to parents for $26, which casts fundamental doubt on the usefulness of vaccines. Can you tell us now that you will, now that you are pro-vaccine, that you're going to have your organization take these products off the market?
Senator, I have no power over that organization. I'm not part of it. I resigned from the board.
Yeah, that was just a few months ago. You founded that. You certainly have power. You can make that call. Are you supportive of this?
I've had nothing to do with
leadership. Are you supportive of these onesies?
I'm supportive of vaccines.
Are you supportive of this clothing, which is militantly anti-vaccine?
I am supportive of vaccines. I will. I want good science, and I want to protect.
But you will not tell the organization you founded not to continue selling that product. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, wow. Bernie Sanders has finally found something he cares about more than yelling about billionaires. Baby onesies. Now, I think it goes without saying that this is one of the most ridiculous gotcha attempts ever broadcast in a Senate hearing. First off, Bernie isn't debating RFK Jr. on vaccine policy, science, or anything of actual substance. Instead, he's hyper-fixating on baby clothes. This man is literally grilling a former presidential candidate and now an HHS cabinet appointee over $26 onesies. Like, it's a national security threat. Meanwhile, the pharmaceutical companies that made billions off rushed, liability-free vaccines don't get a single peep of scrutiny from him. Where's this level of interrogation for Pfizer's revolving door with the FDA? Where's the outrage over pharma execs getting richer off government mandates? Nowhere. Because Bernie isn't interested in holding an actual power accountable, just in scoring cheap shots. Then we get the real kicker. RFK Jr. patiently explains multiple times that he has no control over the organization selling these onesies because he resigned months ago, and yet Bernie keeps badgering him like a malfunctioning NPC. Are you supportive of these onesies? Are you supportive of this clothing? Will you demand they stop selling it? Like, Bernie, what are you even talking about? Are you off your medication? Should we double check to see if you're having the same thing that got to Biden, but a more aggressive version of it? The man has told you repeatedly he has no control over it. What's next? A Senate hearing on whether RFK Jr. approves of bumper stickers? And the best part, RFK Jr. keeps saying he supports vaccines, but Bernie ignores that completely because this isn't about getting an answer, it's about optics. He wants a soundbite that makes RFK Jr. look like an extremist, and when that fails, he just barrels ahead with a scripted attack anyway, which makes it look even more insane, like he's completely divorced and detached from what's happening right around him. The bottom line, this entire exchange is a joke. Bernie had a chance to actually challenge RFK Jr. on policy, but instead, he went full onesie police while completely ignoring the billions flowing into the pockets of pharma execs. If this is truly the best attack Democrats have, RFK Jr. should be laughing all the way to his confirmation. At the end of the day, this all boils down to one question. Who gets to control the narrative? Who decides what qualifies as a serious journalist, a legitimate debate, or even a valid question? Why is independent media suddenly a threat, but legacy outlets with a history of fabrication are the gold standard? Why are politicians screaming about corruption while their own pockets are lined with industry cash? Why do they demand accountability from their enemies but never from their donors? And most importantly, why do they think you're too stupid to notice? Because that's the real game here. It's not about facts, science, or truth. It's about power, and they're terrified of losing it. So the next time they lecture you about standards, misinformation, or whatever buzzword they're using to keep you in line, ask yourself, who actually benefits from the story they're telling you? Because I promise you, it's not you. Anyway, you tell me what you think in the comments down below. Hope you have a terrific day. Peace.